It all started with an interview he gave for the Carson City paper. We started shooting in Carson City, Nevada. And in like the second day, I walk into the set with John Wayne, and he's holding the Carson City newspaper. And he says, "Why the fuck did he have to say that?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Here's his quote." And he said, and the quote was from Siegel, "You know, they say John Wayne eats directors for breakfast. If he takes a bite out of me, he's going to get indigestion."
This is Talking Pictures, a movie memories podcast from Turner Classic Movies and HBO Max. I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Today's guest, Ron Howard. Depending on when you first encountered Ron Howard's work, you have a certain impression of who he is. For TV fans of a certain age, maybe he's Opie, the sweet son of the sheriff in The Andy Griffith Show, or he's Richie Cunningham from Happy Days, or the narrator in Arrested Development. He's been parodied by himself in The Simpsons and in the studio. For nearly all of his adult life, he's been behind the camera as one of the top directors in Hollywood. Ron Howard has 2 Academy Awards, both for the 2001 movie A Beautiful Mind, one for directing, the other for Best Picture. Ron is also a prolific producer. Ron has directed films in nearly every genre, even directed a Star Wars movie. That was Solo. His work has crossed paths with so many people, he has to be the only person in Hollywood history who has worked with, you know what, I'm gonna save it for the conversation. He's lived through so many eras of Hollywood that he is the perfect guest to cap off season 3 of Talking Pictures. Here now, my conversation with Ron Howard. Ron Howard, thanks for being here. Great to talk to you.
Pleasure. Likewise.
There's a moment in your life that I am sort of most interested in because I think it shows a moment of intense emotional maturity. And so you're probably like, this is like your age 28 to 31. Like you Night Shift, your second movie, but first in 5 years, right? Your first super mainstream movie.
Yeah.
And then you got Splash and Cocoon. And like all of a sudden the guy from Happy Days, the guy from Andy Griffith is a pretty close to an A-list Hollywood director. And you like start thinking about what kind of director you want to be. And you recognize that, oh, my next movie matters. I want you to take me a little bit into your headspace there. Like what is happening and how much anxiety is fueling your decisions?
When I actually, you know, because I did Grand Theft Auto for Roger Corman. Then I did a television movie every year for 3 years in a row. Then I left Happy Days, committed to being a full-time director. Brian Grazer and I made Night Shift. That was a very well thought of movie, successful, not massive, but a great calling card. And then, as you said, this remarkable experience of these 2 back-to-back top 10 movies that were nominated for Oscars and so forth. And I actually did feel some anxiety about what next, how to choose, what to do, and so forth. And I actually remember reading a chapter in Frank Capra's autobiography, Name Above the Title. But after he won an Oscar for It Happened One Night, his story goes that he didn't know what to do next. He became deathly ill. Doctors couldn't diagnose his problem. And he really had taken to his bed and was, he said in the book, dying. And somebody came to his door, whoever it was, I think it might have been a lady, said, I understand Mr. Capra is very ill. Could I possibly talk to him? I'm a Christian Scientist, and I'd love to have a conversation with him. And eventually the wife allowed it, and the upshot was that this person said, you're not sick, you're afraid. You've finally gotten the thing you want, and you're afraid. And I believe if you face that, you'll be fine. And I'm sorry to bother you, but that's my point of view, and left. And he recognized the truth in that.
That the fear was what? Success? Like
the fear was, what am I getting? How can I follow this? How can I ever top this? I finally won the Oscar. What else could I possibly do? So it was this, he said, this very neurotic anxiety that had overtaken him. And I began to feel just a little bit of that. And I thought it through, and I thought of just two things. I thought, well, one, I really want to explore as many genres and styles and tones as I can as a director. As an actor, I was very appropriately typecast. By then, I'd done enough directing to realize now they were casting me, in the way I should be cast, but it was pretty limiting creatively, and I didn't want that. So I didn't want to start trying to chase the sort of fantasy comedy success of Splash and Cocoon, and sort of make that a brand. I didn't want to be branded as a director. I wanted to be a filmmaker who explored this medium that I loved. And the other thing that I remembered was Garry Marshall talking about a season of television. And he said, our job is to kill ourselves every week, but we also have to know that in a season of 24 episodes, maybe 4 of them are going to be really great. Yeah. Really, really great. Hopefully we only make a couple of stinkers, but that's going to happen. We're going to have bad weeks and we're going to fail with certain episodes. And let's hope the rest of them are damn good. But I remember flashing to that and thinking, oh, if I'm frightened, what I want, this is my way of life. I think I will make my career a season of television in Garry Marshall's mind. And I'm going to give it everything I've got. And I'm going to take some chances. And I'm going to recognize there can be some ups and downs, and hope some of them really, really, really resonate.
That's a great way of thinking about an entire career. So here's where I'm going to go off on a somewhat of a limb here, walk out, because I don't know this about you, but I think this about you. So I think that the years 1967 and 1976 are the most important 10 years and probably the best 10 years in American cinema history. And I say that as a guy who's on TCM and acknowledging how great other 10-year runs were.
Sure. Right? But 39's great, but I tend to share that was really it's an evolution that occurred, and that excitement around that exploration and discovery was pretty dynamic and amazing. But when I saw The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde, those 2 movies just really lit me up. And then Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, and then The Heat of the Night. And it was just this banner period, the period that you're talking about. And I was still doing the Andy Griffith Show, and I was talking to these directors, and now that I'm older, I'm 13, 14, and they said, well, that's the difference between directing TV and being a filmmaker. That's movie making.
You could understand that right off that this was different. This was something special, different.
And they were explaining it to me, and I could discuss these movies with them. And that's actually when I fell in love with going to the movies, with the medium. It was less about understanding it because I'd been around it all my life, and it was much more about, I want to create something like that. I want to be a part of those kinds of stories.
So having grown up with those movies, by the way, any others from that? You mentioned Zeffirelli's film Romeo and Juliet, and you mentioned In the Heat of the Night and The Graduate. Any others from that decade that stand out to you?
There were. There were. Even the TV movie Brian's Song was kind of amazing. My dad and I went to see that as a movie.
Right, they released it in theaters.
Didn't speak to each other. At the end, we just stayed, and in those days, they didn't kick you out, and we stayed and just watched it, a second time. Those are the movies that really leaped to mind. Boys in the Band, amazing movie, and then of course, just a little later comes, French Connection and all that. But I just then I'm going to the movies 3 times a week. And then pretty soon I'm dating my wife Cheryl, and that's all we do is go to the movies.
Let's just pause for a moment and acknowledge how great it must have been as a young kid with his dad. You're following your dad's footsteps, and you guys are close. You were always close, clearly, and you're sitting there. You get to watch Brian's song with your father in a theater twice.
Yeah. It was a great moment.
Did you cry? Were you crying?
Yes. Oh, cried.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, definitely. We both did. But one thing about him, a Wild Bunch.
Yeah.
Wild Bunch. He would let me go see R-rated movies. He was okay with it. He usually would go with me. And so even like at 12, 13, I remember Andy being a little shocked that I had seen Bonnie and Clyde. And I asked my dad about it, and he said, well, you know, it's all make believe and you're putting on a show. That stuff's not real, but let's talk about it. And he was great. He was a wonderful man. And I was lucky to be his son.
So I'm curious. Here's my little pop psych bit. Like, if when you start to emerge then and with Night Shift, which, gives you the basis to have these 2 top 10 hits and Splash and Cocoon, do you feel, we're only, even Cocoon 85, we're not that far removed from, the movies that we're talking about, Godfather Part 2, Conversation, 3 Days of the Condor, Wild Bunch. These movies were of that era. Do you feel pressure to be like Coppola, like Scorsese, like Bogdanovich, like Mike Nichols, like Sidney Lumet, like these sort of legendary figures of that era? Spielberg had emerged by then, of course.
Yes, he certainly had. I certainly respected that and thought about it. Lumet was a huge influence and favorite of mine. I also was just savvy enough to recognize that I had due to my professional experience in comedy, that I had a leg up there. I knew people from that world. I understood cadences of jokes. I knew how to edit for comedy. I knew how to stage for comedy. I knew how to help actors be funnier. And so, it did make sense to me to play into that strength. And it also was a time with, Landis and Reitman and Harold Ramis, and that comedy was beginning to be king there for a moment. And so I felt like I wanted to play into that, but I certainly wanted to find my version of the most ambitious stories that I could make.
I like it that you understood that, having done the Andy Griffith Show and having done Happy Days, that in addition to guest starring on nearly every TV show, it seems like in the 60s and 70s and early part of the 70s, but you understood something that maybe those directors didn't have, right? That TV, which certainly then was seen as lesser than, right. Actually gave you and many others this foundation for how to be funny on screen in a way that maybe, Sidney Lumet was, like you, one of my favorite filmmakers, but I don't, it's not like his movies are uproariously funny. Right.
Understanding the kind of the math and physics of comedy was definitely a benefit at that moment. And look, I think it really helped Penny Marshall and Rob Reiner as well, coming out of the television world. And Alan Alda directed a couple of very strong movies as well. But the thing that I recognized while I was making the television movies was that I was not interpreting screenplays in an innately cinematic way. I was really always thinking about performance first. And by the way, that allowed my films to be very watchable, because when actors doing good work, is always worthwhile. But the project that I took upon myself was to really to understand cinema. Now, I'd been a cinema major, but I'd only gone for a couple of years. I'd gone to USC, where I'd learned a few things, But had you ever identified visual metaphor in a cinematic frame and talked about something using those terms on the set of the Andy Griffith Show, I think Joe Barnes, the gaffer, would have escorted you from the stage.
It's
not the way we talked or thought about things. Although you could make a case that, there's a lot of symbolism in Aunt Bee's apple pie.
Man, the way the light would hit the fruit. Oh, come on. Yeah. Bounce right off.
Sid Hickox was the cinematographer on the Andy Griffith Show. And I was just watching White Heat the other night, and he was the DP on White Heat.
Oh, yeah.
He had been a Warner Brothers veteran, like one of those hard-boiled standalone cinematographers or go-to cinematographers. But he was retirement age now and grabbed on to the Andy Griffith Show, and it kept going and going and going, and so did Sid. He did every episode.
Good for him. I tell you what, we'll take a quick break with Ron Howard and come back momentarily. Thank you, Ron. Stick around. So you talked about when you were early in your directing career, the work, that you were really focused on performances. I imagine still that's almost every director I talk to, they still tell me the most important thing is how you work with, is casting, other than the screenplay, right. Casting, and then how you approach dealing with the actors who are going to bring these characters to life.
But by the same token, when you cast great actors, they're very often more or less autonomous. But I love working with them, and I love creating the environment where they can really flourish. And so that continues to be one of the really compelling reasons to keep doing this is, I'm just have the opportunity to work with, one remarkable artist after another. And that thrills me. But it was really I asked Don Peterman, who had just done Flashdance, to do Splash. And he said yes to this. Don was a California boy, totally unpretentious, a surfer, and so he didn't speak in lofty terms or poetically about cinema, but he had a great eye. And as we started working, he understood my strengths and understood what I was doing with the staging. But once in a while, he'd say, in terms of where to put the camera, you're being too literal. If we stage this over here, this is going to be a little more magical. I can light this in a certain way. This location will mean more because it's the graphics of it, will help us tell the story. And I then worked with Don after that on Cocoon, and that I felt like in a lot of ways my education really began as a filmmaker in a way, working with Don Peterman. And then I've worked with some really strong cinematographers, Mikhail Solomon, Salvatore Totino, Don Siegel, Roger Deakins, Anthony Dodd Mantle. And I always feel like I'm improving my game every time. And now I cast the films very carefully, not only the actors, but also production design and DPs, because I want to keep pushing myself and not necessarily follow the path that initially leaps to my mind as I'm reading the script.
So you mentioned Splash when you first worked with him. I was just listening to you telling a story about that I have heard from Tom Hanks. I did a piece, he was on TCM, but he also, and a piece we did for CBS Sunday Morning. And you guys told the same story about Splash and your interaction. But Tom basically told me that on Splash, which then you've repeated, but that Tom was so concerned, having come off Bosom Buddies, a sitcom actor like you had been. He's here with these comic geniuses, Eugene Levy and John Candy, and he feels this need compulsion to him almost to bring his level of comedy to match theirs, to be as funny as the funny guys.
Right.
And then you stepped in.
Well, we had a read through, in fact, at my house, with Tom and John and Eugene and Gans and Mandel were there. Brian Grazer was there.
They're the screenwriters.
Brian was the producer, and it was his idea. And Lowell and Bablu were the writers. We had also done Night Shift together, and Tom was pushing. That was it. He was just reaching. He was pushing, and I could see it. And yeah, I mean, he'd been a comedy force on his show, Bosom Buddies, and he's a funny guy, but that wasn't this role, and that wasn't what we needed. And so I immediately just took him aside and said, "Everything's good. Everything's great. Your job is to slowly but surely really be in love. You need to fall in love. We need to believe that. And if you're reaching for jokes and things like that, we're not going to quite take those emotions as seriously. And you're going to be funny. You're going to be funny enough, I think I said. They're going to score like crazy. You don't have to." And he took to that. He took to that immediately. And I will also say that I policed for it. And at times he would riff and try something, and I'd say, "Okay, great, but let's just get it the way it is in the script." And I'm telling you, on 3 different occasions, I can't tell you exactly what they all are, but one of them was like a thing he did with a mango. "Mr. Mango on my shoulder." There was a bit that he invented that I, at the time, thought, "Oh man, it's okay, good. Let's just try it again without the mango."
Your thought is to rein him in.
Yeah, and in the cutting room, I used several of those moments, those comedy moments.
Mr. Mango on my shoulder. Freddie, dance with me.
Please, not in front of the Teamsters. Come on.
And I remember saying to myself, if I ever get a chance to work with this guy again, I'm going to give him his head.
Did you ever work with him again? So what's interesting is that you then in editing see that, wow, some of those things that he did that my instinct was to tamp down on were rather quite brilliant and
really funny and effective and good. But one thing is, I do a lot of that with actors where I'll say, "Okay, yes, please give me what you've got." But, I reserve the right to say, "No, let's do what's scripted or give me my choice." And, I've worked with a lot of different personalities of actors. None of them have ever sandbagged me on that. I always feel like they give me my version. But I think they also trust me, and their trust is warranted, that I will 100% go to the cutting room with an open mind and look at their version.
And when you say
that's my bargain.
When you say sandbag, you mean, because actors, I'm sure, have done this to directors. They're okay. They want to do it their way, and then you want to do it like the script. So they'll make the script take not good. They'll blow that take.
They'll flatten that out a little bit, or they just won't have their heart in it.
Right. So, so when Hanks tells that story, he suggests that he was, going to be fired, like that he was blowing it. I don't know that. I didn't even buy in the moment. That
he wasn't in trouble.
Right. But that it was incredibly meaningful to you, and you put your arm around him and was like, "Hey, you're funny, but man, just love the girl. Right. Your job is to love the girl. Right. They'll be funny. Keep it like simplify it." Right. And he said it was just unbelievable advice to get at that stage in his career from you. He's super grateful from it, but he didn't have the part of you recognizing what you, so I just see these two guys who've now worked together 5 times, this brilliant actor and pretty good director, and we know good writer. I mean, his novel's terrific. And Hanks and you, this great filmmaker, that you both sort of at this young age learned something from the other guy. You learned that actors, sometimes they make this better than I could have imagined. And he learned, hey man, settle down, be yourself, be true to the character.
Ben, I'm always learning, and I'm not being modest or something about it. I mean, it's I like to say it's the medium that can't be mastered. That's the way I feel about live action filmmaking. And I'm also always grateful for the injection of creativity that actors can bring. Once in a while, we're so under the gun that I just need him to just do what the scene because we've got to go. But I mean, what I do is I try to be efficient, not to save money, but to create space for creative, ingenuity. And if we can be ahead of schedule and a little under budget, then if I need to take 2 hours to flesh out something with an actor, it's producers aren't wringing their hands and I'm not feeling anxious. We're doing the work. And I love the work. I love the creative problem solving. That's the thing I carry from my childhood.
I defy anybody, especially somebody who loves old movies, to find someone who has directed Bette Davis and acted opposite Henry Fonda and John Wayne. I think it's a category of one.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly fortunate to have been in that position, and and then there were a lot of other greats who I learned a hell of a lot from. Glenn Ford and Ben Johnson, and and people like that, it's unique. I recognize that, and I'm proud of it.
So you then get to work with John Wayne in '76.
Yeah.
And what was John Wayne's final film?
Correct.
By the way, a pretty good movie. The Shootist, directed by Don Siegel.
It holds up well. It's paced slowly, deliberately, but it builds beautifully. The acting is good. Don Siegel was a very strong director. He had done Dirty Harry at this point, and Escape from Alcatraz, and another very good movie with Walter Matthau, but I'm forgetting the title. And Charlie Varick, I think.
Charlie Varick. I was going to say, I think it's Charlie Varick. Charlie Varick's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, really good movie
of that era.
And anyway, I really went to school on Don Siegel there. That was just great. And learned so much from him. I also learned a lot in a rather uncomfortable way because Wayne and Siegel were feuding. They did not get along. And I was getting along with both of them separately, just fine. Siegel, because he knew I loved cinema, and I was already, at USC Cinema School, and really planning to try to be a director, and asking a lot of questions, and Wayne, because he liked my professionalism, and I also had the guts to sort of say, hey, do you want to run lines? No one really would talk to him in between setups.
Right, because it was John Wayne.
It was John Wayne. It was Duke, He had a couple of people, a guy he would play chess with, and who was the still photographer who had worked with him on a lot of films, but it's very closed little bubble that he was operating in, and he was perfectly friendly to me, and he said, yeah, I'd like to run lines. And we had a lot of scenes together, heavy dialogue. And it was very interesting to see him take a scene and shape it into a John Wayne performance in the most positive ways.
Yeah, I got you.
But I also was getting an earful about, his dissatisfaction with Don Siegel and the way he was shooting it and the way it was being lit, and Bruce Surtees Jr. and it was and I felt like Siegel, who told me at a certain point, he said, hey, look, after about 2 weeks, if you're the director and it's you or the star, you're gone.
Right.
You're gone. They can't afford to go back and reshoot. I don't care how much they love what you're doing. You're gone.
They're not firing John Wayne.
Right. And so I like this script and I like this movie and I'm going to write it out. And I think, John Wayne felt the same way. But I also felt like Siegel didn't do a great job of bridging the gaps. And it was pretty intense. But I remember saying, there's a better way to deal with even superstars than this. And
I was curious whether that fight informed you when you've again, it seems like Ron Howard sets are generally pretty positive places, probably overwhelmingly so, but there must have been moments where they weren't, and I imagine that experience informed how to handle things for you.
It definitely did. I felt that the key was that a lot of things were allowed to fester for a long period of time. When the strategy that I've followed over the years is when there's a difference of opinion, go right into it.
Right.
You don't have to make it a fight, but you're there to achieve something together, and talk it through, and don't let it become something that's petty and emotional, when in fact it's a creative concern or a neurotic concern. And if you shine a bright light on a neurotic concern, most people, even the most neurotic of them, say, "Oh yeah, I guess I was a little insecure about that." Okay, you think it'll be okay? Sure.
I didn't quite understand how Don Siegel, who by that point was a really accomplished director by 1976, this guy who shot the montage, who created the montage sequences in Casablanca, put them together. He came up as a montage director at Warner Brothers, and then started directing his own films. And, again, he directed Eastwood already a few times and would go on to direct him again in Escape from Alcatraz. And that he didn't think, yeah, this is John Wayne, who's in his 70s now, and this is one of his last pictures. It turned out to be his last picture. Go in and fix it, man. Fix it. You're a big boy. Go fix it.
Yeah, it all started with it all started with an interview he gave for the Carson City paper. We started shooting in Carson City, Nevada, and in the second day, I'm walking to the set with John Wayne, and he's holding the Carson City newspaper, and he says, "Why the fuck did he have to say that?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Here's his quote." And he said, and the quote was from Siegel, "They say John Wayne eats directors for breakfast. If he takes a bite out of me, he's going to get indigestion." And so it upset Duke, it just kind of got worse. So on the one hand, Siegel made a really good film, and I learned a lot from him. On the other hand, there were some days where he and John Wayne were really, really at loggerheads.
Give me a sense then, because 4 years after you do The Shootist with John Wayne, you've made it as a director, and you do this movie with Bette Davis, Skyward, right? Where she obviously, typical Bette Davis role. She's a flight instructor,
crusty flight instructor.
It's what you imagine Bette Davis as, right? I think more than anything else, flight instructor Bette Davis. So give me a sense of what about Bette Davis is not anachronistic, is not from another era that people would understand in this modern age.
Two words, and they still apply: work ethic. And now in that time, you have to realize there are people at work getting stoned. There are people showing up, having partied all night and stuff. And so it wasn't. Today, there's a little more discipline around it. Yeah. It's not as reckless. It's not, but that was an era where, it was kind of like, hard drinking, hard partying people were sort of, you found a lot of them in the business, and, smelling of booze and forgetting their lines, and stuff like that. And you saw none of that with these people. I can tell you a couple of specific Bette Davis stories. I'd made the Roger Corman movie, Grand Theft Auto, and 2 other TV movies. So I was beginning to feel a little bit more experienced. And this was a step up. This was sponsored by General Electric, I think. And so it was kind of a holiday special. It wasn't about Christmas, but it was meant to play around Thanksgiving and so forth. So it was
inspirational story.
Inspirational story. And for NBC, I was producing it as well as directing it. I was also guaranteeing the completion of it. So we were working as an independent production company, fully making that movie. So I had, absolute responsibility. And Bette Davis really liked the script. I didn't speak to her. It was submitted to her. She liked it. She wanted to do it. NBC wanted her, and they paid. They paid their top of the show TV movie money for Bette Davis. And she was going to have 11 shooting days there in Texas. We were going to shoot it in Dallas, Texas. But the story was about a wheelchair-bound 14-year-old girl whose parents were highly protective, and she dreamed of flying. And Bette Davis was playing the flight instructor who secretly agreed to give this girl flight instruction and allow her to have that freedom. So that was the story. I found a girl who had been disabled in an accident, was wheelchair bound. She had never acted before, but she was the right age. And I auditioned her along with a lot of other people, a lot of other girls. And I thought she could do it. She was green, but I just felt like she had something. And also just the difference with the way she operated the wheelchair and the way she dealt with scenes where her character was talking about it. It resonated. The honesty of her understanding of that character really mattered to me. It was an X factor. And the network agreed with me. Bette Davis did not. She did not want to play all of her scenes opposite a 14-year-old girl who had never acted before.
Right.
And she thought it was nonsense that any good actor could bring the truth of that performance to life. And she suggested some people she'd like me to meet. And I did. I auditioned them. Meanwhile, I still haven't spoken to her. It's all through agents. But, I did my due diligence and I wanted Susie Gilstrap. And so I called up Bette Davis, and the first time that I'm talking to her, I said, Miss Davis, Ron Howard here. I know how you feel about this, but I've really thoroughly gone through this, and I'm an actor myself. I can promise you I'm going to support her and you, and this is not going to be a challenge for you in these scenes. And she said, well, I disagree, Mr. Howard. And I said, well, I know you do, but I think once you meet Susie and start working with her, yeah, well, I don't know, Mr. Howard. You're not convincing me. And I said, well, Miss Davis, the network supports this, and this is a decision that I've made. I think we can make a wonderful movie. And she said, okay, Mr. Howard, I guess we'll see. And I said, Miss Davis, by the way, please just call me Ron. And she said, I will call you Mr. Howard until I decide whether I like you or not. And slammed the phone down. Perfect Bette Davis movie reading. Meanwhile, now I'm really thrown by this. I mentioned it to my dad. He said, look, she's an Oscar winner. Every actor knows they need to be directed. Once you get in the flow, just do your job. And so that's all that was left for me, is to try to do my job. Now, her favorite director was William Wyler, who always wore a suit and a tie. So even though it was hot as hell in Plano, Texas in August, I showed up in a suit and tie my first day, and went up to give her a direction at one point. And I sort of moved up alongside her, and she was startled. She threw her hands up with her unfiltered Camel cigarette, and never fall from her lips. She said, "Oh, loud enough for the whole crew to hear this. Oh my God! I saw this child walking up to me. Now I was 24 at this point, 25 maybe. You frightened me. I couldn't possibly imagine what this child could have to say would be of any consequence to me." She does the Bette Davis laugh with the camel. So I kind of chuckled, and I leaned in and I gave her the little direction, which was only a physical staging thing. It was nothing. Okay, so we did it. I go back to the camera. I'm popping Tums. The day is pretty tense. Finally, we got to a scene where I gave her another adjustment that was bigger, It had to do with an exit and a line of dialogue. And I said, maybe you should turn back on this line and then go, or something. And she said, oh, no, I don't think that will work. And I said, well, just try it. Try it for me so I could just see it from the camera's position, if you don't mind. She said, oh, no, of course. That's me. I'm the director's kid. Of course, I'll try it. And she did it. And immediately, upon executing the note, she said, no, you're right. That works better. Okay, let's shoot. Okay, good. We shot that scene.
Good. That's nice.
Now, at the end of the day, I said, okay, Miss Davis, wonderful first day. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow. And she said, okay, Ron, see you tomorrow. And I'm not making this up. She patted me on my ass.
Come on.
Now, I wouldn't say that it was a cakewalk from then on, from there on, but we did fine. And I also wouldn't say it's her greatest performance. So I don't know that I lifted her in any way, but we certainly made the movie. It was well reviewed, and was a real turning point for me. And having the experience of directing Bette Davis, not somebody who just felt like they were lucky to be there, not a friend of mine or a family member. When it came to working with all of those greats on Cocoon, I was incredibly grateful to have had those 11 days directing Bette Davis.
Oh, right, sir. When you get the same caliber of actors from that era on Cocoon and Tandy and Don Amici. Yeah. Oh, that's something. Yeah. And you got Bette Davis to call you Ron. Like you won her respect. Like she got it. Like she got it. She was like,
by the way, at the end of the movie, she said, look, you're a Pisces. Pisces tend to go way around the barn when they're giving a note, but your ideas are good. And Wyler was my favorite director, and you could be a Wyler. So she wanted to end it on a gracious note. I never achieved those heights, but I certainly appreciated her making that kind of a gesture.
Well, I mean, I don't know that you're in the league with the William Wylers and the George Stevenses. I got news for you. So
thank you.
And the Howard Hawkses, right? People who could make, and Curtiz, guys who could make any kind of movie. So let me ask it this way. I know you've answered it this way before, and I hope you'll answer it again. What's the movie of yours that you are sort of either you wished had gotten more attention from audiences, or you think should have? Like, give me one that pops into your head.
Well, now would be Eden, which came out last year, and mixed reviews and very little box office. It just had a limited run anyway. I love that movie. I'm very proud of it. Very proud of the performances. And so I hope that over the years it'll be seen.
Find an audience, right? Yeah. Which can happen now.
And I've had a few of those. I'm not sure which one. It probably changes in my mind from time to time. I love The Paper, but it was fairly successful in its time, although it only played well in big cities. The Missing is a Western that I made that I really was very proud of. Kate Blanchett was just great in it, Tommy Lee Jones. And it's not a perfect movie by any stretch. There's some things that I would do differently now, but I'm very proud of it. And and it did not do well when it came out.
So you mentioned it. The Paper is one of my 10 favorite movies ever. Ever. Period. Like ever.
Thank you.
And I think that it is the best. I went to journalism school. I was a reporter, a TV reporter when it was my first job, but there is no better movie. Even All the President's Men, even Spotlight, which are sensational,
great,
perfect, legendary movies. What it is to be a reporter, everybody who still thinks they want to be a reporter should watch The Paper. I mean, every 3 minutes, there's some moment I'm like, yeah, that's journalism. That's what it is. That's what it's like. That's the way it is.
That's so cool to hear. Well, David Koepp wrote it with his brother, Steve, who is a journalist.
David Koepp, by the way, just wrote, the Stevens movie. Just wrote Disclosure Day, which is wonderful. Yeah.
It was the first. Well, no, I had done Backdraft. On Backdraft, I learned a really interesting lesson, even though it was fiction, and I had never done anything really based on real events, other than a couple of things, TV movies I'd acted in. One TV movie I'd acted in, but watching De Niro prepare for his role in Backdraft, which was just a 4-week gig, he could have phoned it in. But
I heard you say, like, this was to him, this was a money movie for him. Like, this
absolutely,
isn't, he
absolutely.
was, it was
I mean,
a
he liked
paycheck
the
movie.
script, and he liked,
of
thought it
course.
was good and everything. But this was 4 weeks, $1 million a week, and we could have Robert De Niro in our movie. But he dug so deep to try to understand, the dynamics of fire. He was playing an investigator, so he was doing his own forensic dive, but on a kind of a human level, he met 3 different firefighters who were investigators, and he kept talking to them and like getting them to read the script back to him and things like that I just didn't fully understand what his
he had them read his lines.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
And then when we started shooting, and he just said, well, I kind of like the way he stands, and he says certain things in a certain way. I just want to know. He's so soft-spoken about what he does. But when we started shooting, I realized that, sure, this is Robert De Niro. This is a Robert De Niro performance. He's not trying to be a chameleon, but he's adopted one guy's posture. And he's got another guy's cadences that he's weaving in. And then there was another guy's intensity, and even anger. And I thought, none of that's in the script. He's not changing the script, but he's breathing life into this, not out of his own imagination, not out of his interpretation of the words on the page, but this observation. So I was inspired by that. Yeah. And also I could feel that audiences really appreciated the authenticity that we achieved in Backdraft. So when it came to journalism, I did the same thing. I hung around the Post. It was the greatest.
The New York Post.
Pete Hamill was the editor at that time, and also the Daily News. And all I was doing was trying to pick up on language, behaviors, expressions, tempo shifts, overlapping, and I took a lot of notes, and I got the actors to come down and hang around and watch as well. And so it means a lot to me that paid off for you in that way. That work.
I mean, Michael Keaton is amazing. Marissa Tomei, Robert Duvall, Randy Quaid, Glenn Close. I mean, there's just one unbelievable performance. Your brother's in it.
Yeah,
right?
He did a good job.
Yeah, totally. Oh, yeah.
Glenn Close.
Does your brother not say in that? Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, when Keaton changes his copy. Yeah.
And there was an improv.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Glenn Close's role was written as a man, and I felt like it was a little bit of the sort of traditional oppositional character, and in the newsroom I was observing a lot of really smart, dynamic, focused women in editorial positions. And I went to the Kep brothers and I said, what if we didn't change a word? What if we just changed the name and cast a woman? What about Glenn Close? And they said, well, if you can get Glenn Close, and the studios felt the same way. And Glenn, I mean, we hadn't even changed the name when I gave her the script. She read it. She was just giddy with the idea. And she said, I get to fight? I get to fight somebody? I said, yeah, why not? And she just killed it. She was great.
The Michael Keaton Glenn Close fight scene as the papers go into press is one of the great fight scenes because it's 2 incompetent fighters fighting. Neither of them wants to fight, right? And they don't know how to fight. But it's great.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, and Keaton's nervous when he thinks he heard her. Right? He's like, oh shit, sorry, I didn't. That's not what Anyway, it's to me, it's a perfect movie, and everybody should go see the paper. All right, Ron, we can take one more break. We'll come back, do the Super 8 with you, and thanks. Great stuff.
Great.
All right, Ron, Super 8.
Okay.
What was your most memorable movie watching experience?
God, this is tough. There are 2. You help me narrow it down. One was seeing my dad in a B Western this is one of the earliest memories, in a drive-in in Mississippi. He had gone AWOL, and actually in order to get to be the villain in this grade C- Western called Frontier Woman. And now it was going to play, and we got into his Jeepster, and I remember sitting there and watching my dad get shot and fall over the railing and fall down, and glimpses of that are very vivid in my mind. That was the first one. But the one that really wowed me,
Frontier Woman?
Frontier Woman, it was called. It was about the daughter of Davy Crockett.
And by the way, you haven't said, just tell people who your dad is. What's his?
Oh, my father is Rance Howard,
Yeah.
longtime character actor, and he played the bad guy in Frontier Woman.
Frontier
when he
Woman.
should have been on base. He was still in the Air Force at that time, but I think they might have looked the other way. I think everybody kind of liked Rance.
We weren't in an active war. It was okay.
No, we weren't.
Yeah.
The other one was Leicester Square. I was doing the first movie that I was acting in, which is called The Journey with Yul Brynner and Deborah Carr. We had finished, and now we were touring Europe on our way to the ship. We were going to take the ship back to New York.
You and your folks.
Yes, with my folks. And so it's 1958, and we saw Around the World in 80 Days in London, and it kind of blew my mind. What's interesting is I looked it up, and that movie came out in 56, and so here it was, 58, still playing on a big screen in London.
Do you have any tattoos?
I don't. No.
Yeah. I would have guessed no. If given a choice, I would have said
guess.
Ron Howard does not have any tattoos.
I keep threatening my wife with that. That's the running joke. One of these days.
If you had to get a tattoo of a movie line, what would it be?
Well, it would probably be the Chiefs line from one of my favorite movies ever, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, mine too.
Ah, juicy fruit.
Juicy fruit. Well, you sly son of a bitch, Chief. You hear me, too? Yeah, you did. Well, I'll be goddamn, Chief.
And I used to quote that line all the time. Just any moment of satisfaction was.
But also unexpected, because again, from a character you don't expect to.
That's right.
Offer
Great
anything.
moment.
Great moments. A great call. What movie would you? Let's presume you hadn't been married for 135 years.
Right.
What's a movie you would show a date or someone you were interested in?
Well, I mean, our first date was Mad Mad World. It was a reissue.
Yeah.
And that worked. That was great.
Yeah.
She loved it, and I did too. Now I probably something like Project Hail Mary. It's smart. It's fun. It's also got ideas. I love that movie. If it's a fun movie to share with somebody, that's probably that would be it.
Obviously, you're still making movies, but when you see something like Project Hail Mary, does that like make you feel like, okay, wait, we can still create new stuff, put it in a theater.
Absolutely.
It's not a superhero movie, and it can still happen.
Thrilling to see. Loved it, and it's and really just saw it a couple times already. It happens every so often, and movies are showing some life, which is exciting right now.
Is there a movie villain you secretly relate to or think has been misunderstood?
Well, I don't know about it misunderstood, but the Armin Mueller-Stahl character in Eastern Promises was so interesting to me because he was so rational, so I almost always relate to every good villain. Every great villain is kind of relatable. I also love Gene Hackman in Unforgiven. It's kind of for the same reason.
He's very relatable, and to the point where you don't want him to be killed.
That's right.
Right.
That's
and
right. You understand the position he's in.
Yeah, totally. And just the fact that you mentioned Armin Mueller-Stahl, who's never been, I imagine, it's not like I know his whole, but if he's in it, your movie's better, and his performance is going to be amazing, no matter what.
That's a great movie too.
Yeah. It is Eastern Promises. Yeah. Okay. So for this one, you're a thief. There's a vast warehouse. Every movie prop, all the costumes from every movie are stored. You can steal one thing. What do you take? God. One thing.
Ooh. Speeder bike. Oh, but it won't work. It's just that you can only sit on it. So no, I'm not gonna steal. I'm not gonna steal.
Put it in your house. Yeah.
Well, this is kind of corny, but I'm a little corny. I'm a bit of a corny guy sometimes. I would steal Andy Griffith's guitar from A Face in the Crowd.
Oh, come on. That's the best. It's the greatest. It's the greatest answer.
Give me a chance to lubricate my Adam's apple. Like a little snake medicine, put you in the mood. Ain't Mama a beauty? Oh, a guitar beats a woman every time.
It's the best.
Well, because I found out that was the same guitar that Andy then took, and he stripped like the sequins and stuff off of it and revarnished it himself. And that was the guitar that he had on the set of the Andy Griffith Show. And if he wasn't playing it on camera, he was playing it at lunch almost every day. And so that would be an amazing, amazing prop for me to land.
Well, first of all, that you just bring that up actually moves me that he kept that guitar and it was the one he had on the Andy Griffith Show. So you know better than anybody that, and if you see everybody who hasn't seen Face in the Crowd is the same reaction, like, holy crap, that's Andy Griffith. Yeah. And you realize that without the Andy Griffith Show, if he'd tried to make it, look, there are all these intangibles and about who makes it as a star. Right. That guy could act in a movie and could play any kind of character. Like, that guy was brilliant.
He was, but he made it before the Andy Griffith Show. And of course, it wasn't a big success and he was discouraged by that. But I remember as a kid, him saying that I'm proud of that movie, but I would never want to do it again. Because he said, about the director.
Kazan.
Kazan. He said, he brought out a side of me that I don't like to deal with. I don't like to recognize.
Wow.
And I remember him saying this in the middle of a rehearsal one time.
It also tells you something about Kazan. I mean, how good he was to bring something then out of it.
Maybe the actor's director of all time.
Yeah. Okay, this one's a two-parter. What was your mother's favorite movie?
Gone with the Wind, hands down.
She was an actress, right?
She was an actress. Just loved Gone with the Wind. Loved it.
What's her name?
Gene Howard.
But she got a little, the business turned her off a little bit when you guys got
at first. Well, she was like very successful at college. In fact, Dad told me that people thought she was the best actor or actress at OU at that time. But business did not respond to her at that age. And she gave it up altogether when I was born. And then Clint came along. And then when we were grown, she was doing all kinds of little odd jobs, extra casting and other things. And Bob Totten, put her in a television movie. The guy who had directed me in the Disney movie.
Yeah, he told you to start
writing. He
also
did The Red Pony with Henry Fonda and my brother Clint, which is a really good television drama, adaptation of Steinbeck's book. And Maureen O'Hara is also in that. And Totten put her to work on something and she liked it. And then she was a non-speaking featured extra in Cocoon. And so she was in a lot of scenes and loved it. And then Henry Winkler cast her in a Dolly Parton Christmas movie that he made as a director. And she enjoyed it and it got an agent and went back to work. And she kind of became the new little old lady on the sitcom block. Every sitcom hired her. She also was the librarian in Danny DeVito's, a great movie. Matilda, is it?
Oh yeah, Matilda. Yeah, right. My daughter.
And so she wound up getting a lot of work, and it was really validating to her that she had it all along.
Okay, what's your dad's favorite movie?
High Noon.
Oh, cool.
He loved High Noon. Of course, he loved Westerns, but he also was a writer, and he just thought that was brilliantly structured. Loved it. Also, he was friends with Lee Van Cleef, and in fact had taught Lee Van Cleef how to ride a horse in order to audition, because Lee Van Cleef said, I told him I could ride, and I don't know what I'm doing. And so Dad took him out for some lessons and got him through the audition. And Van Cleef was, wound up doing a lot of Westerns.
Yeah, always the villain, but also what the actors always say: can you ride a horse? Yes. Can you speak Spanish? Yes. Right. Whatever it is. Yeah, of course. Yeah, French. Yeah, I'm multilingual. Movie makes you cry without fail.
Arrival really gets me. The ending of Arrival, which I'm not even sure I fully understand yet.
Yeah, me neither. But
yet it really speaks to me. It really reaches me.
Yeah, no, I saw it in Telluride, and I was moved in the moment, even though I definitely didn't quite fully get it. But it didn't matter. It was still emotionally.
I've seen it a couple times, and it just gets me.
Well, Amy Adams, it turns out, pretty great actress. You know.
Oh my God, she's spectacular and great to work with.
Movie that makes you laugh without fail.
Something About Mary is the hardest I've ever laughed, and then I saw it again, and it still made me laugh, hard. So I go Something About Mary. I could also say Terms of Endearment is the movie where I laugh really hard and cry.
Yeah. Terms of Endearment is super funny.
Also as good as it gets. I mean, is funny and also very, very moving.
All right. So here's your wild card question. Since you've been very effective at sort of spoofing yourself, both in The Simpsons and in the studio, like you got as a sense that you're willing to make fun of yourself. You know who you are. You know what your rep is in Hollywood.
Right.
And you lean into that. So give me a sense of what your favorite spoof, parody, satire is. What's one that you love?
Of all movies?
All movies. Yeah. Just a parody that you adore.
Well,
you could go Dr. Strange. You could go Mel Brooks. You could go Dr. Strangelove. I mean, they're all.
I think Young Frankenstein to me. But Blazing Saddles might be even more outrageous and even funnier.
Did your dad love Blazing Saddles?
Loved it. Not realistic, not at all. You'd never punch your horse, but he laughed his head off.
Ron, you're the best. Thank you very much. Great
Pleasure.
to talk to you. Look forward to seeing you sometime. Having a
Likewise. That would be fun.
Ron Howard, everybody. Thanks very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I love that conversation with Ron Howard, but it is illustrative of how expansive his career has been. We did not talk about Happy Days, and we barely mentioned American Graffiti. We did not get into Parenthood or Ransom or Apollo 13. We didn't talk about Apollo 13 or not getting an Oscar nomination for Apollo 13, which was pretty devastating to him. We didn't get to A Beautiful Mind, which won him 2 Oscars, Best Director and Best Picture. What else? Let's see. The Da Vinci Code movies, Frost Nixon, Solo, that's his Star Wars movie. We also didn't talk about Hillbilly Elegy, J.D. Vance's memoir, which Ron Howard directed for the screen with Amy Adams and Glenn Close. On election night in 2024, when it became apparent that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance had been elected president and vice president, Ron Howard texted J.D. Vance. He wrote, "Godspeed. Try to serve us well." Did J.D. Vance respond? I don't know, because I didn't ask. All of which means I immediately nominate Ron Howard to be the first person we book on back-to-back seasons of Talking Pictures. We'll repeat nothing from this episode, except, of course, the paper, because, I won't be able to help myself. That is it for season 3 of Talking Pictures. Thanks so much for joining me in Citizen Cave, so dubbed by Edgar Wright. Thanks to him for that. Until next time, I'll see you on TCM. James Kim is the showrunner of Talking Pictures. The managing editor is Darby Maloney. Video editor is Andrew David Lewis. Dory Stegman is our talent producer. Additional talent booking by Noea Murphy. Glenn Matullo mixes every episode. Set design by Raphael Laurier and Leanne Reagan Barnes. Angela Carone is our director of podcasts at TCM. Team at HBO Max Podcasts, that's executive producer Michael Gluckstad, senior producer Allison Cohen-Sirokach, and producer Kenya Reyes. The HBO Max Concept and Design Studio, Marta Duarte Diaz, Karen Guan, and Kendall Thomas. Production support from Jaco Friedman, Liz Winter, Jean Renault, and Kristen Hassel, and special thanks to Julie Baton. That's our show. You can watch this podcast on HBO Max and YouTube, as well as listen to it wherever it is you listen to podcasts. I'm Ben Mankiewicz. See you next time.